Avery pulled her car into the school parking lot and felt her heart pound. She had been waiting for this moment ever since Child Services called to say a 10-year-old boy named Jalen needed a foster home. She took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped onto the playground. Children's voices and laughter filled the air, and Avery scanned the crowd for a small figure with dark curls and wary eyes. She spotted him standing alone by the swings, clutching a sketchbook. Without hesitation, she walked over. "Hi, Jalen," she said softly. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. He looked up, surprised, his brown eyes meeting hers for an instant before he looked away. "I'm Avery. I'm here to drive you home." He folded his arms and didn't answer. She knelt to his level, trying not to loom over him. "I brought your backpack and some snacks. Do you want cereal, bars, or fruit?" He paused, then mumbled, "Bars." She smiled, sensing a tiny crack in his guard. They walked to her car in silence. Avery unlocked the door and handed him a cereal bar. Jalen tore off the wrapper and took a cautious bite. She buckled her seatbelt and started the engine. "So how was your day?" she asked, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. He shrugged, staring straight ahead. She remembered her first day as a teacher, meeting nervous students. She wanted to give them time and space, but she also wanted him to feel safe. The drive home was quiet, except for soft music on the radio. Avery pointed out a park where she used to read books as a child. Jalen didn't respond, but he turned his head to look. She felt hopeful. When they arrived at her house, she opened the door and showed him his new room. It was painted light blue with a shelf for books and space for his sketchbook. Jalen's eyes widened. "You drew superheroes?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yeah, I used to draw them when I was young." He walked to the shelf, touched the framed pictures of landscapes she had painted, then set his sketchbook on the desk. Over the next hour, Avery made spaghetti while Jalen sat at the table, working on a drawing. She called his name gently. "Dinner's ready." He joined her, forgetting to tuck in his shirt. They ate in companionable silence. Avery watched him chew, thinking about all the times he must have felt alone. She decided to share a little about herself. "I love cooking," she said. "My father taught me when I was 8. Jalen looked up, curious. She felt the moment she'd been waiting for. Connection. After dinner, Avery showed him the living room and offered to play a board game. Jalen agreed. As they played, he laughed at a funny move she made. Avery smiled, her chest swelling with relief. This was the start of something important. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. When he hurried to bed, she left the hall light on and whispered, "Good night, Jalen." He peeked out and nodded before closing the door. Avery sighed, feeling that today marked a new beginning for them both. Avery woke up early the next morning with one goal: to make today a little brighter for Jalen. She tiptoed to the kitchen and started mixing pancake batter. While the griddle warmed, she arranged bowls of fresh strawberries and honey on the counter. She remembered how food often made her feel safe as a child. Maybe it could do the same for Jalen. Down the hall, Jalen stirred as the sweet smell floated through his new home. He padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "What's all this?" he mumbled. Avery smiled and flipped a golden pancake onto his plate. "Breakfast," she said simply. He eyed the fruit and cereal bars from yesterday. Avery added a dollop of whipped cream. "I thought we could try something new today." Jalen took a cautious bite and blinked. "It's good," he admitted, his voice soft. They ate in silence for a few moments. Then Jalen pointed to a stack of books on the table. Picture books Avery had chosen. "Story?" he asked. Avery nodded and opened the first book. She read aloud about a brave mouse and adventurous owl. Jalen listened, eyes fixed on the pages. Every now and then he asked a question. Why did the owl help the mouse? Avery answered, and soon he began predicting what would happen next. After breakfast, Avery suggested a trip to the local park. Jalen hesitated but followed her outside. The sun was bright, and birds chirped overhead. Avery pushed him gently on the swing. At first, Jalen pumped his legs slowly. Then he kicked harder, laughter escaping his lips. Avery watched, heart swelling. She recalled his quiet face yesterday, And now here he was, smiling. Next, she led him to the sandbox. They built a castle together, using a small bucket and shovel. Jalen sculpted a tall tower while Avery created walls around it. He explained his design. This tower protects the kingdom from monsters. Avery nodded. That's smart. He looked proud. As they cleaned up, Avery noticed Jalen's sketchbook peeking from his backpack. She asked, "Mind if I see your art?" He opened it slowly, revealing drawings of superheroes battling villains. Each figure was detailed, showing muscle lines and cape swirling. Avery studied a drawing of a hero rescuing a child. She said, "You're really talented." Jalen's cheeks tinged pink. In the afternoon, they returned home and played a video game Avery had learned last night. She made goofy mistakes, and Jalen laughed until tears formed. She teased, "I need practice." He grinned and offered tips. Before long, they teamed up to defeat on-screen enemies. When the day ended, Avery prepared dinner, homemade pizza. She let Jalen choose toppings. He carefully arranged slices of tomato and cheese. While the pizza baked, they sat and talked about school. Jalen confessed he missed his friends and worried about fitting in. Avery listened closely and shared her own first-day jitters as a teacher. He seemed to relax as she spoke. Later, as Jalen got ready for bed, he paused at the door. "Thank you," he whispered, then entered his room. Avery left the light on and stood outside for a moment, feeling hopeful. She knew trust wasn't built in a single day, but today had been a step forward. She closed the door softly and whispered, "Good night, Jalen." The hush of the house now felt warm, and Avery believed their journey together was just beginning. Avery arrived home from work with a grocery bag in one hand and a tired smile. Jalen met her at the door, his school bag slung over one shoulder. "I finished my math homework," he said, stepping aside so she could come in. She set the groceries on the counter. "That's great," she replied. "Want to show me?" They settled at the kitchen table. Jalen opened his notebook to neatly written equations. He explained each step as Avery listened. When he reached a tricky problem, Avery paused, thinking. "Try breaking it into smaller parts," she suggested. Jalen nodded and reworked the equation. A few minutes later, he grinned and pointed to the correct answer. Avery clapped softly. "I knew you could do it." After homework, Avery pulled out an old video game console. Jalen's eyes lit up. She handed him the controller. Together, they guided pixelated characters through a forest. Avery made a wrong turn and laughed at herself. Jalen laughed too, the sound light and free. Every time Avery fell into a trap, Jalen gave her gentle advice. When they finally won the level, they high-fived. Later, Avery suggested they bake cookies. In the warm kitchen light, Jalen measured flour and sugar while Avery cracked eggs. He stirred the batter carefully, his tongue peeking out in concentration. Avery guided his hand as he scooped spoonfuls onto the baking tray. The sweet smell filled the room as the cookies baked. Jalen paced nearby, eager. When they finally came out golden, he blew on one and bit into it. "So good," he said, crumbs on his lips. After their snack, they moved to the couch with Jalen's sketchbook. He flipped to a new page and hesitated. Avery watched, waiting. Finally, he drew a small figure of a woman holding a child's hand. His lines were shaky. She asked softly, "Is this your mom?" Jalen's hand stilled. He looked down and whispered, "I don't remember her face." Avery's chest tightened. She reached out and touched his sketchbook. "It's okay to miss her." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I think about her all the time," he said quietly. Avery put an arm around him. "I know you do." He rested his head on her shoulder. For a moment, they sat in silence, sharing a quiet understanding. When Jalen wiped his eyes, Avery suggested they make a memory book. She pulled out colored paper and markers. "We can draw and write about things we do together," she said. Jalen looked curious. They began by gluing a photo of their first pancake breakfast. Jalen wrote "Our first morning" in messy letters. Avery added stickers of stars around the photo. As they worked side by side, Jalen talked about his hopes. Learning to ride a bike, making new friends, maybe one day finding his birth mom. Avery listened, nodding. She promised to help him with each dream. By bedtime, Jalen tucked the memory book under his arm. Avery tucked him into bed. "Today was good," he said, his voice softer than usual. She kissed his forehead. "It was," she agreed. As she turned off the light, Jalen whispered, "Thank you for everything." Avery closed the door quietly, feeling the gentle warmth of a trust that was growing stronger each day. Avery picked Jalen up from school early on a Tuesday afternoon. "Today's the first full rehearsal for the play," she reminded him as they walked to the car. Jalen's shoulders tensed. He had agreed to try out last month, but now the idea of performing before his classmates made his stomach twist. Avery gently squeezed his hand. "You've got this," she said, and Jalen managed a small nod. When they arrived at the auditorium, Jalen slipped inside and found his friends already on stage, practicing their lines and blocking. Avery watched from the back row as students moved between marked spots on the floor. The teacher called out corrections in a brisk voice. Jalen remembered a project. Jalen cleared his throat and spoke louder, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. After the first run, Avery joined Jalen backstage. She leaned close and whispered, "You're doing great." He swallowed, glancing at her. She smiled and added lightly, "Hey, if you're enjoying Jalen's journey, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt moments." Jalen blinked at the odd reminder, but couldn't help a grin. He repeated the line under his breath, amused at how Avery wove it into their real life. As the rehearsal continued, Jalen stumbled over a crucial line. His eyes darted toward the audience seats, as if expecting a ghost. Avery stepped forward, quietly offering, "Focus on the person you're talking to." Jalen looked at his scene partner and imagined talking just to her. He tried again, smoother this time. The teacher nodded, pleased, and the scene moved on. Later that evening at home, Avery brought out an old trunk of costumes and props. She spread them on the living room floor. A faded cloak, a plastic sword, even a play script folded at every line. Jalen turned pages, touching the words as if they were precious. Together, they'd rehearsed under a single lamp's glow. Avery stood in for the other characters, shifting her voice and stance. Jalen tackled each line until she could hear confidence in his tone. Afterward, Avery asked, "How do you feel?" Jalen tapped the page. "Better," he admitted. She nodded. "Remember, it's okay to be nervous. It means you care." Jalen closed the script and tucked it under his arm. Avery watched him, thinking how far he'd come from that first silent drive home. The next day at school, Avery arrived again for final rehearsal. This time, classmates filled the seats with backpacks and water bottles. Jalen stood at center stage, breathing slowly. The lights warmed the wood floor beneath his feet. He glanced toward the wings, spotting Avery's steady figure. Drawing strength from her calm presence, he raised his chin. When the teacher called action, Jalen delivered his opening line clear and strong. As the scene ended, the class burst into quiet applause. Jalen's chest rose with pride. Avery stepped out to congratulate him, and he wrapped her in a quick hug. The barrier between them felt smaller now. They walked home together, talking about next week's performance. Jalen laughed as he described a tricky stage direction. Avery listened, heart full, knowing they were growing into a true team. One scene at a time. Avery woke up before dawn on graduation day. She dressed carefully and prepared a small white carnation, his favorite flower color, to give Jalen. She packed her camera and a paperback book in case she had to wait. Jalen appeared at the breakfast table in his borrowed cap and gown, staring at his reflection in silence. His shoulders were tense and his hands shook slightly as he adjusted the tassel. "Ready?" Avery asked gently, placing the carnation in front of him. Jalen pressed his lips together and nodded, though his eyes flicked away. They drove to the middle school in quiet. Avery kept one hand on the wheel and one on the flower, rehearsing what she would say to comfort him. Jalen stared out the window, watching early morning traffic. When they arrived, the gymnasium doors were open and families lined up inside. Balloons bobbed near the entrance, and teachers greeted students by name. Jalen paused at the threshold, taking in the crowd. Avery squeezed his shoulder. "I'll be right there," she said. Jalen swallowed and stepped forward. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a small stage. Jalen found his seat in the third row. Avery sat 2 rows behind, careful to give him space but close enough he could see her. The ceremony began. The principal welcomed parents and students, announcing awards and special mentions. Jalen sat very still, his hands folded in his lap. When his classmates walked to the stage, Avery held her breath. She snapped a photo of each child receiving a certificate. Jalen watched, eyes focused on the diploma paper in the teacher's hand. Then it was Jalen's turn. The teacher called his name, Jalen Harris. He stood, his gown brushing the backs of the chairs. Avery unbuttoned her coat, held her breath, and leaned forward. Jalen walked up the steps, his cap at a slight tilt. He took the diploma with both hands, his knuckles white. The gym lights reflected off the plastic cover. Jalen turned, diploma in hand, and froze when he saw Avery standing. Avery waved and cheered softly, holding the carnation. Her voice shook. "Congratulations, Jalen." Tears gathered in her eyes. Across the gym, Jalen blinked rapidly. He lowered the diploma and whispered to a friend beside him, "Why is she even here?" The words carried through the quiet space. Avery felt her chest tighten, but she stayed standing, smiling through her tears. After the ceremony, the gym emptied. Avery approached Jalen by the stage exit. The cheer of other families faded behind them. Jalen stared at his shoes, clutching the diploma. Avery held out the white carnation. "For you," she said softly. Jalen stared at the flower, uncertainty in his eyes. Avery knelt down and spoke gently. "I didn't come for the ceremony alone. I came because I believe in you. I'm proud of you." Jalen looked up, his face unreadable. He took a shaky breath and accepted the flower without speaking. Avery stood and offered her arm. Jalen slipped his hand into hers. Together, they walked out of the gym into the warm afternoon light, the diploma and the flower held between them. Avery closed the gym doors behind them and led Jalen toward the school lockers. Jalen's shoulders hunched, and he kept his eyes on the ground. Avery felt the sting of his question echoing in the empty hallway. She paused by his locker, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm here because I care about you," she said, unlocking the padlock. Jalen didn't respond. He slid open the metal door and took out his backpack. The hallway lights hummed above them. Avery waited, hands folded calmly. Jalen slammed his locker shut without looking up. "You're not my real mom," he snapped, voice barely above a whisper. Avery sighed, searching for the right words. "You're right. I'm not your birth mother, but I want to be someone you can count on." Jalen crossed his arms and stared at the floor. Avery knelt beside him so she was no taller than his chest. "I know you've lost a lot," she continued. "I can't replace your mother, but I can promise you this. I will stay until you don't need me anymore." Jalen's fists unclenched slightly. He looked up at her, eyes glossy. "Why would you choose to do that?" he asked, voice cracking. Avery placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because you're important to me. Because everyone needs someone who believes in them." Silence wrapped around them as Jalen considered her words. Distant footsteps sounded at the end of the hall. A teacher passed by without stopping. Jalen shifted his weight, uncertainty in his movement. Avery stayed kneeling, afraid to break the fragile moment. Finally, Jalen exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to trust you," he admitted. Avery nodded. "Trust takes time. Let's take it one day at a time. I'll keep showing up even when it's hard." She stood and offered him her hand. Jalen eyed her hand, then slowly reached out. Their fingers met in a hesitant grip. Avery smiled softly. "We'll figure this out together," she promised. Jalen gave a small nod, uncertainty still in his eyes but something like relief in his posture. They walked out of the hallway side by side. Jalen's cap had fallen off and dangled from his backpack strap. Avery reached over and straightened it without a word. Jalen accepted the gesture, his expression softer. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed their faces. Avery pointed to a bench near the entrance. "Want to sit for a minute?" she asked. Jalen nodded, and they took seats facing the parking lot. Nader spoke for a moment. Avery finally broke the silence. "I brought you something," she said, pulling a small notebook from her bag. "We can write down thoughts, draw pictures, anything you want. No rules." Jalen took the notebook, turning it over in his hands. He looked at her and gave a faint smile. Avery felt her own eyes sting and looked away. Jalen whispered, "Thank you." She reached over and ruffled his hair gently. "You're welcome," she said. Together, they sat in quiet understanding, the first true step toward healing. Avery set her alarm early the next morning and tiptoed into Jalen's room. She gently shook his shoulder. "Rise and shine," she whispered. Jalen sat up, rubbing his eyes. Today, they planned to visit the library and then practice riding his bike at the park. Over breakfast, they passed buttered toast and orange juice back and forth. Jalen told Avery about a science project at school. As he spoke, his voice grew steadier, and Avery felt a quiet pride in his confidence. They reached the city library just as the doors opened. Sunbeams danced on the glass panels. Jalen's eyes widened at the tall shelves filled with books. He led Avery to the youth section and pulled out a book on space exploration. Avery found a chair, and they read side by side. Whenever Jalen stumbled over a word, Avery whispered the pronunciation. He smiled each time he guessed what happened next. After 2 books, Jalen selected a graphic novel about a young hero, and Avery checked them out. From the library, they walked toward the nearby park. Jalen carried his bike helmet in one hand and a library bag in the other. Avery carried the borrowed books. At the park entrance, Jalen swung a leg over his bike. At first, he wobbled. Avery ran beside him, her hand hovering just above the seat. "Look ahead," she coached. "Keep pedaling." Jalen's face tightened with effort. A few feet later, he found his balance. His legs pumped faster, and for a moment, Avery let go. Jalen rode a short arc around a concrete path before slowing and turning back. "I did it," he cried, breathless. Avery rushed forward and scooped him into a quick hug. "You did," she said, her voice warm. Jalen pointed at the path he'd mastered and then at Avery. "Thank you," he said quietly. Avery smiled, brushing grass clippings from his jeans. "You did all the work." After biking, they sat on a wooden bench under an oak tree. Avery pulled the library books from her bag. Jalen read aloud a passage about stars. As he read, he traced words with his finger. Avery listened, heart full. When the sun rose higher, they packed up and headed home. Jalen promised to return the books soon so they could pick new ones together. Back at home, Avery brought out the scrapbook they had started. Jalen spread glue sticks and colored pencils across the table. Together, they placed photos from graduation and printed snapshots from their library visit and biking session. Jalen wrote captions in his neatest handwriting. "Learning together, first bike ride, new adventures." Avery added stickers of stars and planets around his captions, matching the space theme. As evening settled, Jalen climbed into bed with the scrapbook tucked under his arm. Avery sat at the doorway. "Will you stay with me until I fall asleep?" he asked. She nodded and sat on the edge of the mattress. Jalen closed his eyes. Avery whispered, "I'm right here." In the soft glow of the hallway light, she read him one of the space passages from the library book. Jalen's reading evened out, and Avery smiled, knowing each small moment was weaving stronger threads between them. Avery arrived home from work to find Jalen waiting by the front door, his backpack in one hand and a drawing in the other. He held it out to her. A bright picture of the two of them riding bicycles under a sunny sky. Jalen's smile was wide. "I made this for you," he said. Avery took the paper carefully. "Thank you," she replied. She pointed to the sun in the corner. "Did you draw that?" Jalen nodded. "It's our bright days," he explained softly. Avery's heart warmed. She hung the picture on the fridge with a magnet they had pressed together last week. After putting away her bag, Avery suggested they bake a cake together, Jalen's idea of a celebration. He raced to the kitchen and pulled out a mixing bowl. Avery preheated the oven while Jalen measured flour, sugar, and cocoa. He cracked the eggs and stirred the batter with energetic circles. Avery watched him laugh when batter splashed on the counter. As the cake baked, Avery asked about his day. Jalen talked about new friends and how he had shared his picture with classmates. He said they asked who drew the sun, and he proudly said, "Me." Avery smiled. "You're growing more confident every day," she said. When the cake timer rang, they opened the oven to find the cake perfectly risen. Jalen lowered the pan onto a cooling rack. Once it cooled, they frosted it with chocolate icing. Jalen held the icing spatula with both hands, careful and focused, while Avery guided his movements. They decorated with sprinkles and wrote, "We did it," in messy letters. That evening, they invited Mrs. Hawkins, the neighbor, for a small slice. She sipped tea at the kitchen table and complimented Jalen's drawing on the fridge. Jalen stood tall. "Avery and I made this," he said. Mrs. Hawkins nodded. "You two make a great team." After Mrs. Hawkins left, Avery and Jalen cleared the dishes and sat on the couch. Jalen rested his head on Avery's shoulder. She wrapped an arm around him and asked, "What do you want to do tomorrow?" Jalen thought for a moment. "Let's go to the lake," he said. Avery smiled. "We will." The next morning, they packed a picnic and drove to the lake. They spread a blanket on the grass and ate sandwiches while ducks swam nearby. Jalen skipped stones across the water, counting each skip. Avery joined him, and they laughed when their stones sank. As the sun set, they packed up and walked along the shore. Jalen paused and picked up a smooth pebble. He handed it to Avery. "For you," he said. She put it in her pocket and kissed his forehead. On the drive home, Jalen leaned against the window, looking at the sky. Avery glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He turned and gave her a small wave. She waved back, holding the pebble in her hand. That night, Jalen placed the pebble in his drawing on his bedside table. Avery tucked him in. He said, "Thank you for today." She replied, "Thank you for letting me be with you." Avery turned off a light and closed the door. She stood in the hallway, watching the glow under his door. She whispered, "Good night, Jalen." Inside, Jalen whispered back, "Good night." And in the quiet of the house, they both felt that home was no longer just a place, it was them together.